few minutes leeway. Not this time. This would be a good time to turn off your phones. If you don't, I will turn off the coffee. I'm not kidding. I'm serious about this. My name is Carmen Russell-Suchansky. I chair the events committee here at the National Press Club. I'm very, very, very excited about this event because I am a journalist, but also because I took out a bunch of loans for my undergrad experience. I'm sure a lot of people here did. So we're going to get into the media's complicity in how much education has come to cost, and also I guess how much loans we're ending up taking, the loan crisis, as it were. I would like to take just a quick second to welcome you to the National Press Club and say this is a great place. It is the eminent club for journalists here in Washington, D.C. and the world. We have a lot of great events like this one. Just to give you a couple of examples, on the 17th of this month, we have a Press versus Politicians spelling bee. Feel free to come. This is open to the public. You get to see, well, it's pretty obvious. Journalists go against members of Congress in a spell-off, as it were. And then very excited to also have an event on the 25th, which is we'll have 4 journalists from Nicaragua, most of them in exile, talk about media suppression there. I'm sure you've all followed the news in the last year about a lot of things that have been going on in Nicaragua, including attacks on journalists. But anyway, to get it to this event, I'm going to introduce our moderator. Jamaal Abdul-Alim is an education editor for The Conversation, an award-winning journalist from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He broke into the news business as a crime reporter in the old Milwaukee Sentinel during his undergraduate years. He has covered higher education for more than a decade, mostly as a freelancer for a wide range of publications, including the Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, Education Week, Washington Monthly, The Hechinger Report, and diverse issues in higher education. And with that, I'm going to give it over to Jamaal, and he is now in charge. Thank you. Jamaal, thanks.
Thank you. And thank you to the members of the audience for joining us this morning. Even if you're only here as an excuse to get out of the office, we're honored that you chose us to be that excuse. With that, let me introduce our panelists. To my far left is Paul Glastris, editor-in-chief at Washington Monthly, as well as the College Guide and rankings that they put out every year, and also a great mentor to none other than yours truly. To my in the middle is Kaitlin Pitsker, associate editor at Kiplinger's Personal Finance magazine, and to my left is Kaitlin Mulhere, reporter and special projects editor for Money. Well, that's quite dual role there, reporter and editor, I tell you. And so before we begin, just wanted to note that the Press Club invited U.S. News as well as the Wall Street Journal both to participate and to discuss their rankings, but they declined. So with that, we'd like to get into the discussion of higher ed at a crossroads, and what role does the media play in the crisis. I guess the editor in me wants to say, what role, if any, does the media play in the crisis? But Kaitlin Mulhere, if you could just please begin with a kind of an overview of the higher admission scandal that broke earlier this year.
Yeah, so unless you guys were under a rock, you probably remember back in March when the FBI arrested about 50 people for a variety of charges: racketeering, money laundering, mail fraud, money fraud, all related to helping the children of wealthy families get into a handful of schools. So I think the investigators said the parents, about 30 parents were also arrested. They paid a combined $25 million to a variety of people to get their children into these schools. And there were 2 main ways they did this. One was by like bribing or paying off testing center proctors to help their students get higher SAT and ACT scores. And then the other was bribing college athletic officials to get their applicants a like special athlete flag for sports that they didn't in fact play, let alone be good enough to play at the collegiate level. So since March, I think everyone or most all of the people who were charged have filed either pleaded guilty or non-guilty. Of the parents, I think it's about split down the middle between those who have pleaded guilty versus not guilty. The college athletic officials, interestingly, like almost all of them have pleaded not guilty. And so far, only one person has been sentenced, I think. But next week, one of the most high-profile people, actress Felicity Huffman, is set to be scheduled, and she's accused. She pleaded guilty, and she paid $15,000 to let her daughter have, I think, unlimited time to take her SATs. So I think one thing that's interesting is since this happened in March, I think we're still going to see that the hearings are ongoing in Boston. And even this week, there were some documents that came out related to how important donations are, or how much admissions officials at the University of Southern California pay attention to donations when deciding whether to admit students. So I think that there's probably more information, and depending on who you are, more embarrassment to come out over the, as these cases continue.
Yeah, and I wish we could get deeper into that because I mean there's always kind of a rationale behind some of these things. But with that, we'd like to get in, allow each panelist to provide kind of an overview of their college rankings, as well as the editorial focus, and then at the same time, this is going to be a marvelous feat. Answer the question: what role, if any, does the media play in the admissions crisis? And I mean, we're all editors and reporters, so I know we're quite skilled at getting to the point, trimming things down. So maybe, Paul, you might want to go first?
Sure, be happy to. Michael Kinsley, the great editor and journalist, famously said that in Washington, the real scandal is not what's illegal, the real scandal is what's legal. And by that he meant it's not the bag of cash given to the congressman to change his vote or her vote. It's the perfectly legal PAC contribution that's not a front page news story, but a FEC filing. Nobody notices. And I think that's the case with this scandal, this Varsity Blues scandal. It's a great story. It's a Shakespearean story. It's great. Everybody enjoys it. But if we treat it as, well, shame on those rich financiers and B-list celebrities for cheating the system, and those squash coaches for taking the money, and the reform ought to be, more audits of squash coaches, a little tightening of the processes, then we're missing the underlying scandal, the legal scandal, which is we have a system of higher education in this country that so tilts benefits, so tilts acclaim, so tilts focus and attention on a handful of elite schools that it warps how the whole country, and certainly the professional class, looks at the role of college in America. And instead of universities being a source of equality and democracy, they become engines of inequality and oligarchy. And I believe it's that bad. I think we have gone through a multi-decade period in our country where what used to be the gateway for average people, low-income people to gain entry into the middle class has become a way for the upper middle class and the truly wealthy to perpetuate their privilege. And that's done legally, and it is abetted by the press, I believe. And so when we started the college rankings at the Washington Monthly, we looked at the dominant ranking at the time, and still the dominant ranking, U.S. News and World Report, and looked at what their metrics are. And their metrics are boiled down, there's many of them, but they boil down to three simple things. They rank schools based on exclusivity, meaning how few students they let in. Wealth, meaning how much money they take in and spend on students. And fame, based on reputation. What do other colleges, presidents, and so forth think of that college? And when you have a system like that, what it really winds up being is a kind of acknowledgement and perpetuation of the idea that certain elite schools define what a good college is, right? A good college is a college that's sort of like a country club with beautiful grounds and so forth and wealthy people, but with lectures instead of golf. That's our idea of a good college. And what happens is all the other college presidents, in order to become important and gain in stature, try to turn their colleges into that. And what happens is that fewer and fewer colleges are available to educate the 90+% of students who can't get into selective schools but need a college degree to enter or stay in the middle class. And it leads to these insane illegal scandals, right? And it makes states wind up giving more money to flagship universities that educate the upper middle class whites and half as much money per student to, say, community colleges that educate folks of color and lower income. So
your rankings actually kind of shift the focus.
That's right. That was a long-winded way of getting to the point, which is what we do is we measure three things. First of all, we ask not what is the best ranking for upper middle class parents and kids to find a good school. We say, what are the best colleges for taxpayers who are shelling out $180 billion in revenue every year supporting the higher education system? What do the taxpayers and citizens want out of their system? Number one, we say they want upward mobility. And so we measure things like percentage of Pell Grants and graduation rates and what students are making 10 years after they start the university. And are they charging a reasonable price for the degree itself for essentially median income and below families. Number two, taxpayers want their colleges to produce the research, the scholars and scholarship that drive the economy and human flourishing. And number three, we want colleges to encourage students to become better citizens, to give back to their country and their community. So we measure things like the number of percentage of ROTC at the university, those who go on to the Peace Corps, and whether the school does a good job of voting and or encouraging their students to vote. So those three things, upward mobility, research, and service, we call it. If every college were to compete for rising on our rankings, and I hope they do, we would have a country that's not more inegalitarian, but more egalitarian, more prosperous, and more democratic. So that's the basic idea. And we get all kinds of very odd schools that U.S. News and others don't make the top of their rankings, do make the top of ours.
Excellent. So, Kaitlin, being editor of a personal finance magazine, perhaps you could speak about what are some of the distinguishing characteristics of the rankings that you produce?
Absolutely. So if you're familiar with the Kiplinger brand, you'll know that a key word for us is value. We always are looking at value, whether it's about investments or retirement savings, or in this case, colleges. And for colleges, we define value as a high-quality education at an affordable price. This has been our bread and butter for 20 plus years now. We've been doing these rankings since the late 90s. And a lot of our focus has remained pretty constant. We're looking to help families zero in on schools that are going to give them the best bang for their educational buck and really help them find schools that are a good fit for their kid. We're not interested in just promoting the same group of schools every year. Certainly there are schools that appear year after year in our rankings because they're great schools and they do a great job of getting students to graduation day for less money, with less debt, and so on. To that end, quality metrics account for 55% of our methodology, and affordability criteria account for 45%. If you're looking for a more detailed overview, there's a page in the magazine that was left outside that has a breakdown of our methodology. So that part has remained consistent, but we do review the rankings and our methodology yearly. We actually just finished a big review this year of the methodology and made a lot of changes to account for just shifts in the higher education sphere in general. To encourage families to start their college search with a broader array of options, we expanded our rankings to include 400 ranked schools as well as 100 schools that still represent a great value but didn't quite make our initial cutoff. We continue to award points most heavily for four-year graduation rate, but we are also awarding points for 5- and 6-year graduation rates to represent the the benefit that comes from earning a degree, even if it does take an extra year. And we've added metrics to award schools that help students with financial need make it to graduation day, and also revised our rankings to place less emphasis on several factors, including test scores and admission rates. They're still in there, but they definitely account for far less than they used to.
When all is said and done, how to what extent do your rankings mirror the results of, say, U.S. News and World Report? Are they similar, or do they come out quite different?
You're certainly going to find schools that appear on both lists, kind of your usual suspects, if you will. But there are a lot of schools in there that I get letters from readers all the time. I never heard of this school. It's a great school, but we want to highlight those schools. Each year we write a profile piece on one or two schools, and historically that has been a school that isn't probably the first 10 you're going to name if you're naming a group of higher ed institutions. And we get great feedback from readers talking about how they didn't consider that school for their child, and maybe it's a good fit for them or maybe that's not, but it did get them thinking outside the box. This summer I was traveling for work, and I seem to find people who have college-age kids who like to talk to me not knowing what I do. It just seems to happen a lot. And then I'm on the airplane and this woman starts talking to me about how her daughter is attending a school that is number, I think it was 16 on a particular ranking. And she's really disappointed because this girl got into number 1 and the girl didn't like number 1 and she's not going to go. And this mother is telling me how her daughter is not going to succeed or not going to be as successful as if she attended number 1. And at that point I told her what I do and some of the data, and we started talking. I don't know what she walked away thinking, but that is certainly the perception she had, is that number 1 is how many times better than number 16, and that was setting her daughter up for success or failure. And that's unfortunately the perception a lot of people have of rankings.
That's interesting, because before I move to Kaitlin for money, the question of whether or not the media has a role in the actions of what people do, how they make choices about which institution they want their child to go to. So do you see the media as being kind of complicit in the circumstances that led to the admission scandal, or?
I think we play a part in it. The number of conversations I've had with both readers of Kiplinger who contact me directly through phone and email at work or just kind of out in the world, people are reading these rankings, and they are taking them to heart. But while the three of us could go on all day about our metrics and the weightings and the details behind them, a lot of what they take away from them is the actual rank. This school is number 27, or maybe one factoid of this school doesn't give loans, or this school has a really strong grad rate. And those things are important, but it shouldn't be the only reason this school is on someone's application list or why they're visiting the school. And I think it's partially our duty to help them understand our rankings in a more nuanced way, and not just say, here's the top 10 schools, go visit them and apply.
Excellent. So, Kaitlin, from money, if you could speak to what distinguishes your rankings from others, and then also, do you see the media as being complicit in the circumstances that led to the admission scandal?
So I'd say Money's rankings are almost kind of a combination of some of the things that both Paul and Kaitlin highlighted. So we are also a personal finance brand, so we define a good college in much the same way as Kiplinger, which is a high quality education at an affordable price. That said, we have a lot of measures that are also tied to socioeconomic mobility. We look at how many Pell Grant recipients a college graduates. We use the Opportunities Insight figures from Raj Chetty that look at the percentage of bottom income quintile students who are admitted and go on to join the upper income quintile. It's a tongue twister. In terms of how we differ, we look a lot at affordability. We have a unique net price of degree calculation that looks obviously at the sticker price, but then the average institutional aid awarded, as well as the average amount of time it takes students to graduate, since that affects how much a degree costs. We also look at average borrowing both among students but also parents. And we also look at earnings quite a bit. But in recent years, we've put more emphasis on other outcome measures, including some college scorecard statistics about the share of graduates who are not employed and not working, which is sort of a proxy for unemployment, though not exactly the same thing. And then also the share of graduates who are earning more than a high school graduate. And then another area that we're really proud of and we highlight a lot in our rankings is our value-added metrics. So in each of our 3 buckets, which is quality of education, affordability, and outcomes, we have a couple measures that are value-added. And so basically what that means is for the graduation rate, for example, we know that colleges that admit students who have higher SAT scores, higher high school GPAs, students from wealthier backgrounds, students who attend full-time, those colleges, those types of students are more likely to graduate college regardless of where they go. And so colleges that have a lot of those students, you would expect to have very high graduation rates. So with the value-added metrics, we basically compare colleges based on their student bodies and look at which colleges are doing better or worse to similar schools. And so that helps, some schools with, a 60 or 70% graduation rate spike to the top of our rankings, right alongside, the Ivy League colleges with their 90% graduation rate. And in terms of, you asked Kaitlin about how are the schools on our list compared to U.S. News and World Report. One thing, you'll certainly see the same usual suspects towards the top, but I know when I looked at our top 50 this year, it was, I think, about 35 public schools, which is very different than U.S. News and World Report's top, which are largely wealthy private schools. So yeah, and I will say, I put out a handout. Sadly, Money does not have a printed magazine anymore, so we don't have a pretty glossy handout for you guys, but I do have a handout that goes through each of the 26 metrics that we go through, and we have a much lengthier methodology online should you have more interest. In terms of the question about what role does the media play, I'm hesitant to, I guess, say anything about the media at large because I think it's a diverse ecosystem of publications. And I think some publications do a lot of work at trying to dispel the admissions hysteria that I think had a role in the admissions scandal. But that said, yes, I think undeniably the media plays a role in this, right? The decisions we make about what colleges to cover and to what extent, reinforce the idea that there are certain elite colleges that are more important than the public colleges and, to Paul's point, the community colleges that that enroll and also graduate far more students than this, Ivy League plus Stanford and MIT group that we're always seemingly writing about.
I guess I'd like to ask the question slightly different. Does it seem like the admissions scandal would have taken place irrespective of rankings and what's written about in the media? Do these schools have reputations that kind of transcend anything that we do?
I think it's like a chicken and egg scenario. I don't know what came first. With Money's rankings, I think we try and really make the point that that there's no one best college for everyone, and that there are both. It matters where you go to school, because similar schools have very different outcomes for the students, but also that there are hundreds of good schools, and so. It's hard to say. I mean, I do think that there are certain schools that would, even if we eliminated all rankings tomorrow, people would continue to try and cheat their way into, yes.
Now, as education editor at The Conversation, we handle stories written by university scholars. And so one of the things I'm curious about is what role does education research play in the shaping of your rankings? I know you mentioned Raj Chetty. And some of the research that he's doing on upward mobility. But maybe, Paul, perhaps you could speak to, I know you actually have an academic who's involved in overseeing the rankings.
I was telling Kaitlin, some years ago, tried to take the rankings in-house and did it ourselves, and we so screwed it up that we had to put out an apology for getting some of the numbers wrong. So since then, we've had professional academics handle it. Kevin Carey of the New America Foundation, who's not a PhD but is a great researcher, and now Robert Kelchin of Seton Hall University is one of the preeminent young higher education scholars in the country, and I sleep soundly at night. Mm-hmm. And both of them are very much, and we all at the magazine, we read a lot over the course of the year. They do nothing but read and contribute to the higher ed scholarship. So, and our focus is very much also on the policies that lead to the current state of higher education and questioning some of those policies. So, the political science and politics of higher education is really also central to our mandate.
What's your sense as to the extent to which these rankings are measuring what the institutions, what the colleges and universities are actually doing versus kind of ranking the students that they admit? Because there's some research that speaks to how, the rankings kind of mirror the caliber of students that are admitted. Perhaps one of you could speak to that? Or?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's what our value-added metrics are targeted toward, which is, to some degree leveling the playing field among what's coming in and what's coming out, basically. And it is pretty pretty, I guess, surprising to look at colleges that have really similar. I get phone calls from a lot of colleges that want to know why they rank lower than their peer institutions. They say they admit really similar students, and it often comes down to those metrics, that their graduation rate is a lot lower than students who have similar scores and come from similar socioeconomic backgrounds. So do I think we completely eradicate the differences? No, definitely not. I think that's too hard. It's too hard to probably do, but we do our best to try.
Mm-hmm. And then we'll open up for questions right after this one. But one of the terms that comes up a lot in the rankings is quality. And Kaitlin, I heard you speak to that. If you could just maybe kind of elaborate on how quality factors in. How do you even get at what quality is? I know you mentioned that it has something to do with instruction, but how does, a reporter or editor, somewhere figure out that, hey, this institution is offering, what happens in the classroom there is actually making a difference?
Right. Now, finding the right metrics to piece together for the quality component is, I think, a challenge for anyone who's running rankings. We sit around every year and debate this. And to your earlier point, we started pulling points away from certain metrics like admission rate, just because schools that are admitting the smallest slice and they're getting the quote-unquote best students they're going to succeed. So pulling points away from certain things is, I think, sometimes just as important as awarding points for certain things, and not necessarily sticking to what was done, in our case, 20 years ago. But on the quality side of our rankings, we are looking at the quality of students coming in. After speaking with a lot of our readers, we know that it's important to them to have their student go to a school that is competitive, not necessarily admitting 4%, 5%, but doesn't admit every student. That is important to our readers who are looking for that component for their child's education. But really, we look at a slice of that, and then we move on from that, because it doesn't tell you a lot about a student's experience at the school. We're looking at the size of classes, the instructional environment, things like that. We are specifically focused on data in the common data set, which is somewhat limiting, but we are just getting information from there, vetting it all with the schools. So we look at quality in those ways for metrics, but we also talk a lot about the quality of our data. Working with data that is high quality and doesn't have problems is half the battle sometimes. A lot of the data sets that we receive from data providers have problems. The data sets we receive from schools have problems that need to be vetted and resolved. And just one issue can create a whole domino effect throughout the rankings. So it's not just the quality components for the education, but the quality of the data. And we spend a lot of time and a lot of energy making sure we're using high quality data in all of our metrics.
Yeah. I know it can be unnerving when you discover an error. And it just makes you wonder, well, what else is wrong? So, yeah. So, listen, we'd like to open up to questions from the audience. I guess the one thing I would ask is that when you ask a question, to please identify yourself, state your name and your affiliation. So I see a question over here.
And just wait a second, I'll bring. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Is this on? Yeah. Richard Jordan, the Dean of NGO Representatives at the UN over 40 years. Kaitlin, a question for you. My Chinese students all are interested in one thing, leadership. In your evaluated metrics, do you find leadership anywhere? Thank you.
No, that's a good question. No, we don't like measure whether graduates go on to leadership roles. Is that?
Did this college teach me how to be a leader?
Okay, right. No, this kind of reflects the question that Jamaal asked. Is there's really no national measure of like what exactly colleges are teaching or how much students are learning. So we don't measure that, no.
Yeah, actually, I wish I could say more. Actually, I have a story planned on that soon. All I can say is just check for the conversation.